Hi sweethearts, today I'm going to ramble a little bit about labels in the main. This might go on into other territory, but the thoughts that I've been having are mainly based around the concept of labels and the extent of their usefulness and what happens when they actually cease to become useful. And this is as a result of this particular theme coming up over and over again in my life, in my material plane kind of reality, in my cyber life, in conversations that I'm having, conversations that other people are having, worries that other people are having. It just seems to be a theme that's like springing up a lot at the moment and recurring, and it's really causing me to reassess my own opinion on labels and exactly how I use labels in my life and in my spiritual practice, and when I think they have kind of reached the end of their usefulness and why that might be. Labels are obviously very useful. They are a premise of language which allows us to have some kind of starting point. That's how I often see labels, particularly when I'm talking about spiritual things with people. If they can use a label to define themselves, then it gives me a rough starting point. It's not too specific, it's not too overarching, it's not going to give me a massive amount of information. I'm still going to have to dig deeper, and I'm still going to have to engage in a dialogue to kind of traverse the very complex waters of somebody else's spiritual outlook. But the label is a good place to begin that navigation. So really I think it's just a point on the compass in a sense. It gives me a rough idea of whereabouts we are in the terrain. But from there I'm kind of on my own, and it's only my sense of being inquisitive and curious that allows me to go deeper and to actually pinpoint more thoroughly and more clearly what somebody else's standpoint is and how our standpoints might differ, and ultimately to learn something, because I'm really interested in learning about other people's spiritual perspectives. I find that incredibly potent information on just about every level, and if the discussion is open-minded and if the discussion is non-dogmatic, I think it can be some of the most powerful discussion that I can have with somebody. Is the discussion that I will have about their spiritual perspective, their perspective on divinity, their perspective on God, and all of that kind of thing. I think that's really interesting, and I have thought it was very interesting for a really long time. But labels are really tricky, right? And I think this is something that most people that are deeply engaged in their own spiritual life and like to engage in dialogue with others about their spiritual lives have come across. This idea that labels kind of exhaust their usefulness in a sense, and we need to really understand why it is that we're using a label, what kind of emotion or what kind of intellectual response we've attached to that label, and how useful exactly that label can be before we kind of need to put it aside and accept that one word or one small fragment of phraseology is never going to be the whole animal, and it shouldn't be the whole animal. The excitement is in the dialogue, the excitement is in trying to explain the deeper complexities of what one might feel about such a subject. And this can come up in other things too. It can come up in things like politics, it can come up in talking about people's characteristics, people's personal histories, people's feelings on all kinds of different things: death, life, love, parenting, that kind of stuff. We can really use labels to kind of roughly show where we are on a map. But that's really all that a label will do. And also, considering the role of semantics in the words that we use, we could both be using the same label and we could mean really, really different things by it. For example, pagan. Pagan is really just an umbrella term, and this is something that I think many people under that umbrella have had to struggle with. When they say the word pagan, it has to kind of be backed up by these other things, and it has to be explained in more depth. For people that are completely outside of the pagan community and have no real communication or understanding of the inside of the pagan umbrella and what it looks like and where people tend to fall and what the various complexities are, they might hear pagan and think earth-based spiritualist. They might hear pagan and think hardcore occultic witch. They might hear pagan and think of some kind of film about witches. They might hear pagan and think any number of different things. They might not immediately assimilate it with witchcraft. You know, it really depends what their upbringing has been, what their intellectual understanding is of it, and how much exposure they've had to the term pagan and where that exposure has ultimately come from. So it gets very interesting. And when you meet other pagans, you can both use the term pagan, but it really only shows you very roughly where you are on the terrain. I, for example, don't really use the term earth-based spiritualist or earth-based witch or earth-based practitioner, because it kind of doesn't really sit right for me. I don't really feel that it's just earth-based, so it's not really my cup of tea. That particular phraseology doesn't flick my switch. And I don't think that it explains adequately enough what I'm doing with my practice. But when a lot of pagans say pagan, they mean earth-based spirituality. And when they use that phraseology, they mean something which is intimately connected to them, which I'm not quite so connected to. Also, you can be a pagan and have absolutely no interest in witchcraft. You'll probably have some kind of borderline interest in witchcraft and know some witches, but you don't necessarily have to be a witch. And another thing that's really interesting is the use of the word witch. Again, this is semantics, right? So a lot of people I've heard over the years say that witch is a verb, witch is a doing word. If you're not practicing witchcraft, if you're not practicing magic, you are not a witch and you shouldn't take that title. Whereas I know other people that have a completely different idea of what witchcraft is and actually practice spellcraft very, very rarely, if ever. Or they may have gone through a phase of practicing lots of spellcraft when they were younger and then come to a point in the craft where it's not really about witchcraft anymore. It's about ritual and it's about connecting with the earth, or it's connecting with the seasons, or it's connecting with the 8 points on the wheel of the year, whatever it is. So even when we say to each other, I'm a witch, we are again just tracing out a very rough spot on the terrain. And we can understand certain things from that, but then there must be a dialogue in order for us to actually understand more, in order for us to go deeper. And to explore each other's beliefs. The word witch actually tells you very little when you boil it down. The word pagan tells you very little when you boil it down. And I think a lot of importance can be attached to labels, which can actually be quite toxic. Labels are very exciting. When you come across a word that you feel describes what you think or what you believe or where you've kind of been on a particular part of your spiritual journey, that label can be so useful. When I discovered the word pantheist and I realised what it meant, it kind of clicked something into place for me that I had been trying to explain for years in long garbled sentences and fragments of ideas that had come to me in the moment, and I would try and explain it and it would be like a big word vomit. And then I discovered this word, pantheist, and it was incredibly potent. It was so useful. It really gave me this moment of complete lucidity and it was very exciting. I've had certain issues with my mental health in the past and we've not really quite been sure what's going on there, and the family have been confused and I've been confused, and then you go and see someone who's a professional and they place you on this spectrum, and the reason that they place you on some spectrum or give you some label or put you in some box is not to narrow the problem down, but purely so that they can use it as a little mark on their map, a little crisscross on their terrain, so that as professionals they can talk about it together and have some understanding of the starting point of what the problem is. And when you arrive at that label and somebody gives you this diagnosis, if you like, that again can be very illuminating. It can give you a lot of positivity, it can give you a lot of hope, it can make you feel less alone, it can allow you to get in touch with the right resources and actually go towards the right literature because you have this label. So in those ways, I think it can be really potent and really powerful and useful and good and all of that lovely stuff. But I do think that there's a point where we place way too much power into labels. And that's where it can all start to go a little bit wrong. I know a lot of people adopt labels very shortly after they come onto a spiritual path, for example, and then they feel a terrible amount of guilt because that label doesn't quite fit right. I know lots of people in all different aspects of their life at different times have adopted a label and kind of pulled it really dear to their heart, and then realised as they've evolved that they can't necessarily take that label with them, and it makes them feel bad and it makes them feel weird and it makes them kind of question. And sometimes that exploration can be really healthy. For example, I, for 2 or 3 years back there, had this long kind of undulating, interesting, winding relationship with the word witch. What it meant for me, whether or not I really wanted to take it on, what it meant when I took it on in the past. I shrugged it on and off, and that was an interesting exploration for me, and it was something that I needed to do, I think, and it was something that actually brought me ultimately to a really good place in my life, and my relationship with the word was ever stronger. So really, in a way, when you grapple with the label, you learn a lot about yourself, you learn a lot about your ideas. And you come to a place where you are kind of more fully transitioned and more able to explain what you mean. But still that explanation has to take place. You can't just kind of stick with a word and expect somebody to understand everything about your perspective or your position from that word. Nor do I think it's very healthy for people to believe that they can know everything about you from a label, or that they can assign a label to you and decide that that's the whole animal, that's all that you are, you're no more multifaceted than that. I think that can be a real problem as well. So the label is the starting point. That was really the first thing that I wanted to say, and semantics can complicate matters, which is another reason that we need to explore the terrain, not only to understand each other better and to have a deeper understanding of what's going on in the psyche and in the intellectual comprehension of one's spiritual journey, but also so we can actually get on the same page with regard to what you mean when you say witch, what I mean when I say witch, what you mean when you say pagan, what I mean when I say pagan, etc. So really it's just a little marker on a map. I wanted to talk a little bit about systems and certain ways of understanding different groups of people and such. I have a really deep interest in psychology, and I think that certain systems that have been developed by various parts of the psychological community can be incredibly useful and also can offer that dose of lucidity that I mentioned earlier. There are certain tests that you can do to establish how extroverted or introverted you are, what kind of character you have, that kind of stuff. You know, you can look into things like that, and it's interesting. It places you on some kind of spectrum, you answer a bunch of questions, and it kind of gives you this rough idea of where you fall, and as a result of that, how you might cope better with certain situations, what kind of help you might need in certain situations, and so on. And there are many systems that kind of go into what people are like, who people really are at their core level, and we kind of break people down into these different personality types or different archetypes or whatever. There's one system that I'm particularly interested in at the moment. I think it's called the Enneagram system, and I discussed it with a client of mine. That's really interesting. I hope I've got the word right. Is it Enneagram or Enneagram? One or the other. That's something that I'm interested in. That's a cool system to me. I enjoy systems, but I think systems only have usefulness when we are fluid with them, when we understand that they're dynamic and they're changeable and they can be useful in some ways and they're not so useful in other ways. I don't enjoy dogma when it comes to systems, and I don't enjoy the notion that once we've pinned somebody with a label, that's it, they're in this box, and everything that we know about that label is everything that we can assign to them and their personality. I think that's where it starts to become unhealthy, and that's where it starts to become toxic, and that is where I kind of leave off of my involvement with that system, whatever system it happens to be. I think systems are cool, I have time for them, and I find them interesting. But I think we need to be dynamic, we need to be flexible, we need to understand that these systems are just ways and means of categorising things or simplifying things or exploring ourselves more intimately and understanding something more about our core being or the core beings of our friends and loved ones, whatever it is. But if we start to use the system in an unhealthy way, whereby we allow it to give us some kind of God complex or some kind of handle of superiority over other people, or this idea that we can know everything about somebody from a label that we attach to them, from a few questions that they've asked, or from the way that they appear to present to the rest of the world, the way their persona is made up, then I think that's where it starts to become unhelpful, and we start to actually boil people down into these really tasty little ready-made ideas of who they are, when in reality they are so dynamic, so vast, so rich in the psyche, so fractured and fragmented and deep, you know. They're so much deeper. We're all so much deeper than these labels. I've never really been overtly interested in astrology. I understand that I'm a Sagittarius, and as far as I'm aware from what I've read over the years, I am somewhat of a classic Sagittarius. I understand I was born in the year of the rat, and I've read some things about that, and that seems to be pretty dead on. And I've checked by, you know, reading about other years or other astrological signs and seeing if I can actually see them in me as well, kind of trying to see if it's all kind of a little bit smoke and mirrors, and maybe, okay, if I was a Virgo, would I actually identify as a Virgo? And actually, no, I wouldn't. I really am a Sagittarius, and a lot of the qualities from the other astrological signs, they don't actually dominate within me. They don't. So, you know, I can kind of see that there might be something in it. I enjoy the part of astrology which is to do with planetary alignment, and the idea that where we are placed in the cosmos and where things are going on that we know about in the cosmos has something to do with our lives or with the energies that are affecting us and stuff like that. As I said, I don't know a great deal about it. It's not my area of expertise, and it's not necessarily my area of interest. But it is something that is really fascinating to me because I'm a pantheist, so I kind of see that everything is one, and I kind of see that what goes on out there does affect me in here. And it's that pagan thing, it's that as above, so below thing. And even though astrology has never really been my area of focus, I know a lot of fellow professionals online, people who run businesses. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances that I've had the joy of meeting in the material realm and on the cyber realm who are really interested in astrology. And I think that's really cool. And I take what I can take from them, and I enjoy going where my interest kind of sparks me to go in that labyrinth, and then I kind of pull away when it's no longer interesting to me, or when I've kind of hit something that I don't quite fit right with. But I'm not saying that it's something that I'm not interested in. I think it's actually quite intriguing. The thing that has made me decide not to pursue astrology in terms of what I'm doing with tarot is because of this strange insistence, or kind of, how can I put this? It's almost like there's some parts of the community that are interested in astrology. Some parts that actually kind of believe in this really overt way, which I don't think has much to do with reality and with the reality of the complexity of the psyche, that the astrological sign that you are born under absolutely dictates everything about your character, absolutely reflects who you are as a person, that they can actually know how you would react to certain situations, what kind of fears and insecurities you have, how you would respond to XYZ thing, what you're likely to go on and do in your life, all of this kind of stuff. And I find that really quite alarming. For me, I find that odd and kind of over the top. I'm cool with the fact that I'm a classic Sagittarius, and I kind of laugh about it, and I think that it's quite endearing. But I've come across one or two people in the past who have wanted to have full-on discussions with me about astrology and whether or not I would be interested in becoming very heavily involved in astrology. And during the course of those conversations, it's always kind of veered away from the discussion about the usefulness of astrology itself as a system, and it's moved more towards them kind of telling me about myself. Them saying, well, I reckon the reason you don't want to get into astrology is because it's kind of a fear-based mechanism. You're a Sagittarius, so all of your decisions are going to be based on fear. And also Sagittarians are really into the ego, and anything that kind of shatters the ego and shatters the illusion of the ego and what the ego wants to represent is really scary for a Sagittarius. So you have to come at it this way and you have to come at it that way. And that's the point at which I check out, because you can't actually know those things about me from knowing when I was born in the year. Maybe you think you can, as you're filtering it through your consciousness, but I find it strange that other factors aren't brought into consideration too. You could probably know, if you're really into astrology, I'm sure that you are convinced that you know certain things about me from when I was born and what rising moon I have and stuff. I'm really sorry if I'm screwing that up, but that's kind of the rough gist of what I've been told before, your rising sun and your rising moon and things of that nature. I'm getting my birth chart done, so don't worry, I'll be a lot more fluent in this at another point. So you could know these basic things, but it's that mark on the map thing again, okay? It's that cross on the territory. I don't mind Sagittarius being a cross on the terrain. I'm cool with that, okay? But there still needs to be a deeper exploration. There still needs to be a dialogue. There are other things which really have shaped me, shaped who I am, marked my character. There are experiences that I've had. There are events that I have witnessed and gone through. There are people that I've spoken to, the people who raised me, the two sides of my family, the differences between the two sides of my family, where I was born, where I moved to, later on in life, the cultural influences, the music that we listen to. I've been through tragedy, I've been through trauma, I've experienced overwhelming joy as a result of XYZ thing. I've had certain relationships which have influenced me. I've read certain things, certain writers, philosophers. It all interests me. I'm a sponge and I've soaked it all up since the very beginning. And this is true of everybody. So I think that we can use certain things as a cross on the territory, but when that cross starts to become everything that somebody sees in me, I find that really odd. And this is the reason that I do not ask my clients for their birthday or the year of their birth or anything like that. I think that there are certain people out there who are very adept at astrology and would not come at it from an overly dogmatic place, yet they are exceedingly passionate about it. And if a client ever wanted to have a reading that had an overtly astrological focus to it, I could point those clients in the direction of somebody who would be far more helpful than me. And I'm really, really cool with doing that. I think there are some incredible people out there doing some amazing things with astrology. And I love it. And I would point those people in the direction of somebody who is actually adept at it, because it is something that takes a long time to study and a long time to get to grips with, and you need somebody who knows what they're doing. I personally would never want to bring astrology overtly into my tarot practice, because I feel that for me personally, it would open the door potentially to a hell of a lot of assumption and a hell of a lot of kind of overtly focusing on the label. And the reason that I worry that this might be a concern for me is because I've seen other people who are really into astrology doing it. And I would like the opinions, particularly of anybody who's interested in astrology in a big way and who is watching this now. I would like to know what you think of this area of astrology, which is almost like dogmatically convinced that I am a certain way because I was born at a certain time in a certain year. Or even not even that. I've literally had a discussion with somebody that I had to kind of pull away from, because it started with kind of, you know, them trying to encourage me to get into astrology and trying to help me to understand how it would mix with tarot, which of course is an argument I've heard before, and I do get that. But I had to pull away from it because it actually became a full-on character dissection of me and what it means about me being a Sagittarius, and about my ego and about my fear-based mechanisms, and about, you know, how there are only two kinds of Sagittarius and you fall into this category or this category, and that once you understand that, everything else will become clear. And I read that and I thought, see, that's what puts me off though. That's what puts me off, that absolute insistence that the mark on the terrain is all of it. It is all of it. You don't need to have any further dialogue. You don't need to bring anything else into consideration. It's simply, you're a Sagittarius. I can tell you X, Y, Z thing. I know exactly why you're afraid. I know exactly why you've got that hung up. You're thinking this because of this, this, this. And not only is this short-sighted, I personally feel, but I also feel that it's quite offensive. I mean, think about it this way. What does it really mean to know somebody, honestly? What does it mean to know somebody? This is another thing that we say, but it means really different things at different times, right? So you might look at somebody in your life and say, oh, I know that person, meaning like I know them, I've got them on Facebook, I hung out with them a few times, you know, or I went to school with them. And then you have these other times where you're in a relationship with somebody and you're talking to a friend about it and you say, I don't know if I really know him. You know what I mean? I don't know if I really know. I don't know if we've got that connection where I really know. Or vice versa. I don't know if he really knows me. That means something different, okay? Obviously you know them, as in you know them in real life. But then you're talking about something deeper. You're talking about, do I really know that person? What does it mean to know somebody? And a lot of people will say things like, you don't really know somebody unless you've been in a crisis situation with them, or you don't really know somebody unless you've had a big argument and you've worked out whether or not you can get through it. You don't really know somebody unless you've lost everything and kind of they've been there for you, or they've lost everything and you've kind of seen them at their worst. There's a lot of different criteria for different people that kind of establishes whether or not they know somebody, they really intimately know somebody. So the idea of whether or not you know somebody, and the idea of whether or not, you know yourself, and even the idea of whether or not somebody in your life might know you sometimes better than you know yourself. These are deep contemplations. These are not easy questions to answer a lot of the time, and the answers change, and we come up with these different kind of layers, and layers to the answer and layers to the question. So for somebody that barely knows you, on the level that you would consider to be a true knowing, to come out with all of this kind of regurgitated, preconceived stuff about you, and tell you in no uncertain terms, oh, that is who you are. That is who you are because you're a Sagittarius and there's no other way. You know, there's only two kinds of Sagittarius, and it's this box or this box. But to me, that seems crazy. That it seems insane for someone to say that to anyone in any way. How much does it really say about me that I'm a woman? What does that really say about me? How much do you know about me just from knowing that I am biologically female, that I was born biologically female? How much can you really know about me from the videos that I put on YouTube? I talk a lot about my spirituality. I talk a lot about some of my past personal experiences. From watching my videos, you might be able to hazard a guess at some of my politics. You might be able to hazard a guess at what kind of music I like, what kind of people I appreciate having around me, what kind of things cause me stress, what kind of relationship I have with money, what kind of relationship I have with death maybe. You can hazard a guess at things that I don't actively talk about on the channel. You could guess these things, and you could maybe even have a guess at deeper things about me, what my fears are. I don't know, any number of things. But really it takes to traverse, it takes to have that dialogue, and knowing somebody is really about meeting that middle ground between what they think knowing them is and what you think knowing them is. And I think that a lot of really exciting avenues can be shut down when we commit too much to a label. This is the label, this is the system that I'm using, these are the parameters that I'm using, this is the spectrum, and this is where you fall on it, and therefore you are this person, and therefore our connection can only be like this, and therefore etc, etc, etc. I think that this really dumbs the conversation down, and it actually does us a very grave disservice, because we are actually missing out on the meaning. You know, we're giving so much power to these words, and I'm not just talking about astrology, I'm talking about everything that I mentioned before astrology and more. These labels are useful, labels are very useful, they give us that starting point, but when we actually connect a person with these huge psychic depths, these underlying processes going on all the time in a constant state of flux and evolution, when we connect a person too overtly with this one comfortable little slot that they fit into, I think that is doing a disservice to the concept of human interconnectedness, and I want for it to be deeper and richer than that. I want it to be more expansive than that. I want it to be more exciting than that. I want it to be more personal than that, and I want to respect somebody more than just seeing them as their label and deciding, you know, what that means and what that can mean for who they are and what that can mean for their future and what that can mean for who we can be in each other's lives. I think systems are awesome, and I think it's incredible when you start using any system, whether it's a psychological system, a spiritual system. I talked about magical models in my last video, that kind of system. Love systems. I love organising, categorising, getting clear, having a look at what we're doing in one system and what we're taking from another, or where we fall on a spectrum which includes lots of different things. I love that. I mean, tarot is a system, and it's such a beautiful system. It's so meaningful. I think that's great, but I think that we need to understand when it's reached its level of usefulness, and we need to understand what happens to ourselves and each other if we become dogmatic about it, and if we refuse to take off the spectacles of that system and really like connect soul to soul rather than roll to roll, as I once heard Flora say. I like that. I'm going with that. We need to connect like that. We need to get past the words and past the labels, because really the labels are just that starting point, and then we begin that navigation process. And that's where respect really enters the equation for me. The respect of saying to somebody, I may not know you in the way that you believe that it's important to know you, or it's important for someone to be close to you, but I am willing, I'm open, let's have that discussion. I want to know more, I want to get past these words that you assign to yourself to make it easy for me to understand where you are, and I want to get into it. You know, I really like that, and that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for those little nuances in people, and I appreciate it when people do the same thing. So, you know, I think that's just something to think about, is that labels are useful, and I don't think we should limit ourselves with labels. I think we should give ourselves permission to change our minds. I think that you know, labels should be fluid, they should be flexible. We should allow ourselves to be flexible with them, and we shouldn't feel this overwhelming sense of guilt. We shouldn't feel like the label controls us. And sometimes the label will describe us, and sometimes it doesn't. You know, it's okay to be fluid and not quite so rigid. And just appreciate systems for what they are. Allow them to be useful when they're useful, and cast them aside when they're not useful. And understand when you are very heavily into a certain system and you've experienced a lot of illumination through that system, I just kind of feel like it's only fair to appreciate that other people might be filtering things through a consciousness which doesn't quite include that system, or doesn't hold it quite so dear. And when they feel like they are being processed through the machine of that system, they might feel dehumanized by that. They might feel like you're not really looking at them. You're not really listening to them. You're not really talking with them. You're talking at them. You're talking at them. You are taking them and processing them through the cogs of this machine that you so love and so enjoy, but actually that makes them feel like they're not really being seen, they're not really being appreciated for what they really are in all of their glorious, deep, rich magnificence, you know. I think that's kind of what I wanted to say, and how I feel like I've personally been churned out of somebody's system. And I would hope always never to do that to my clients. I feel like there are certain labels that some of my clients would assign to themselves as descriptors, as easy ways for me to understand what's going on. And I would use those labels and I would confirm some of those labels. But every reading is different. Every meeting with a client is different. They are evolving always. They are transitioning. So I don't want, when I first connect with a client and when a client first comes to me for a reading, I don't want it to be, for me personally, I don't want it to be about, okay, you're an Aquarius, so I already know something about you. I don't want it to be about that. I feel for me that would get very dangerous. Maybe in somebody else's more capable hands, it would be cool. And that's kind of why I want to hear the opinions of people who are into astrology. I wonder if you have noticed this kind of weird insistence from somebody. Maybe you don't find it weird. Maybe you're listening to me now thinking, no, I can sum everything about you up. I don't need to know about your mum, your dad, your history, the nature of your birth, where you grew up. I don't need that. I know you're a Sagittarius, therefore I know what's going on. And if you do feel that way, please let me know. I mean, I respectfully disagree with you, but please do let me know, because I do find it fascinating. That a system can be, according to one's perspective, so completely foolproof that there is nothing else needed aside from the information about what time in the year you were born. I think that's really, it's pretty hardcore. But like I said, the planetary alignments and the movement of the stars and the way that affects us and our energies and the solar energy, and I love all that. That's something that I really want to get more into. I think that's fascinating. And, you know, I see some truth in the astrological system. It's cool. I see some merit in it. I just think it's really dangerous when we see everything that way. We, like, any system, astrological or whatever, any psychological system, spiritual system, any system where we churn people out through that same machine without thinking about the complexity and the changeability and the constant movement and motion of somebody's psyche and somebody's shadow, and you know, all of that has to come into the equation for me. So I think that's where labels can get kind of a bit dangerous. And I can't remember if there was anything else I wanted to say. I don't know, I just really wonder if knowing people, knowing somebody is really about actually getting beyond the labels kind of thing. I think that labels are almost kind of like a beginner kind of phase. That's the introductory phase. That's where you get the hang of each other. And then when you really get to know someone, that's when you get to know their nuances and their contradictions, their innate contradictions. That's one thing that for me is so beautiful about human nature. We are contradictory beings, and our belief, our sense of belief and our sense of understanding of something is fluid. To me, that's cool, and adhering too strictly to any label about myself would shut that down. I use labels because they're useful. I use labels because they give you that introductory chapter. But I feel that I have the right to change my mind. I feel that I have the right to contradict myself. I enjoy noticing when I contradict myself because there are lots of lessons to be learned there. That's interesting. Those little nuances, those little things that make me rethink and reassess. That's interesting to me. And it's interesting for me about other people too. And finally, I wanted to say that I sometimes notice when I'm putting my views forth and my content forth and talking about my own spiritual journey and what works for me and what works for my practice, I notice that the vast majority of people that I come across online are so eager to say, that's interesting, this is how I see it, you know, that's interesting and this is how I do things. I've never done it that way before, or I tried it that way before, but it didn't work for me. This is what works for me. And I love that. I love that. That is what I'm doing this whole thing for. You know, yeah, like helping and guiding and giving that compassion. I feel like I'm driven to do that in a wounded healer kind of way. But I love hearing about other people's pathways, other people's journeys, their spiritual path. It's fascinating to me because I'm on one too, and I just love to know what the ups and downs and trials and discoveries of other people have been. But what I really can't abide is when somebody tells me that my path is wrong. in some way, that my path is limited, that I'm doing something that is actually not for my highest good, that I am not understanding things, that I'm not seeing the bigger picture, that I need to know that the way I'm seeing things is skewed. My question would be why? 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 Why does it matter to you? Why does it bother you? If your path is kosher and your path is cool and you are getting a lot out of it and you are getting these amazing transpersonal downloads and you feel like everything is going right for you, keep on, stay on that gravy train. I would never want to drag you off it. But what I'm doing is I'm sharing a little part of what works for me, what it is that makes spirituality the most potent that it can be for me. And what I really don't enjoy is that feeling of somebody saying, that's wrong, that's not cool, that's not the way it ought to be, that's not even the thing. Like, you need to be looking at it like this, like your paradigm is all shades of screwed. It can't be. It can't be. It's a metaphysical perspective that I'm filtering through my consciousness, and it's evolving with me. And I'm the only one who needs for it to evolve with me. I'm the only one it matters to. I'm the only one that it should matter to. I'm the only one who has to sign off on it. And that's really my message for people with regard to magic, witchcraft, spirituality, ritual, labels, any of that stuff. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone else's word for it. Check things out for yourself. Go there yourself. Get your hands dirty. Squelch in the mud of the experience. Come back and know that it's right for you. That's how you connect with the most potency that you can. Giving advice and sharing perspectives, exchanging information, that's beautiful. That opens doorways for people. I would hope that I have opened doorways for some people through some of the things that I've expressed about magic and ritual and so on. And other people in the community through their comments and their content and things like that, they've done exactly the same for me. They've opened so many doors. It's like, oh my God, it feeds me. It's rich. I love it. That's cool, but when you try and dogpile somebody with your way of thinking and let them know that you hold some handle of superiority over them because they don't think in the same way as you and therefore they're not as evolved or they're not as illuminated or they're placing a limitation on themselves, like all you're going to do is shut yourself out of the conversation, and the conversation is warm and inviting and lovely. You should dive in and swim in that water. It's so nice. But if you come at it with this insistent dogmatic perspective, it makes people feel nauseated. It's horrible. So, you know, I think that when people put themselves out there online, I think it's a really brave thing to do. I really do think it's a brave thing to do, because it can sometimes bring people into your sphere of influence or into your kind of, your world, your little corner of consensus reality, who either seek to change you or tell you that you should change. You might get a private message saying you're going to hell. I've had a few of them. It's not pleasant, but I just delete. You might get unsolicited advice. You might get people emailing you and saying, just acting like they've known you all their life and giving you this very unsolicited raw advice, or saying you're wrong, you need to do it this way, or it happens from time to time. And sometimes it can really make you feel unsteady and unsure in yourself if you don't feel like you've got that sense of being grounded in that moment. It might send you off the deep end. I know a couple of people who were making online content for a long time and removed themselves from their communities respectively because of this kind of thing, because they felt like they'd opened themselves up to people who had misunderstood them or placed a label on them or were trying to give them some kind of unsolicited advice. And this is again where labels are toxic. Like, let's just be, you know, give out what you want to give out, hold back what you want to hold back, and don't put up with anybody trying to be dogmatic with you. You don't need to RSVP to every argument and debate you're invited to. You can explain your point of view, but if somebody's just being insistent and really isn't on that same vibration as you, it's okay to just step away and know you're giving from an honest place. Okay, yes, you might assign labels to yourself to make things easier, to make things more structured, to have that moment of instant connection. Chaos witch, I'm a chaos witch, right? Okay, let's get into it. But when you get into it, that's where the joy is. You're a pagan, I'm a pagan. Okay, cool. Well, we've done the initial thing. That's the tick of the box. Now let's get into the magic. Let's check out each other's videos. Let's really do something. Let's get down to the business of really knowing each other. And if somebody isn't interested in knowing you, but is instead only interested in foisting their reality onto you and letting you know that your reality is not good enough or that your path isn't right, just know in your heart that it's right for you and it works for you, and that all you're doing is sharing it. all I'm doing with my content is I'm sharing these little bits of myself because I feel they might be interesting to you, because I feel like I owe that to you, because you do the same with me and I love it. I love the sharing, I love the community, because I feel like it might help people who are in trouble, maybe similar troubles that I've been through in the past, because I feel like it might give some illumination, or it might feed the sense of community in the same way we all do in one way or another, by supporting each other, by commenting to each other, by making VRs, you know, the Facebook group, all that kind of thing. I do it for that. I don't do it to give people a license to give me unsolicited, insistent, dogmatic, overt bullshit advice, or, you know, tell me that in some way things aren't working out for me. Things are working out for me, and I want things to work out for you too. If things are working out for you, that's coolio. I like that. But I really feel that we all need to sometimes step back and think to ourselves, I don't need to be constricted by this label. I don't need to be constricted by this one thing that I've said that somebody else has decided to dogpile on. I am flowing, changing, dynamic. I am ever moving like the river. I'm a river of consciousness inside a river of consciousness. And I don't need to pin myself down. And I really feel like you are so multifaceted, you are so in depth. Respect labels for what they are, love them, appreciate them for what they are, and then try and dig as deep as you can beneath them. Because the label is just the outer skin, it's just the epidermis. It's got nothing on the magic, the majesty that is deeper. And that's kind of all. Much love. Blessed be.